The hum of the engines was steady, but inside the cabin of the jet, silence reigned. Passengers whispered nervously, glancing toward the cockpit door, sensing something unusual had just happened. A man's voice broke that silence, calm yet firm, filled with both authority and something deeper, conviction. "I've flown for 20 years," Captain David Carter said, standing just outside the cockpit door, his dark skin glowing under the harsh cabin lights, his crisp uniform sharp against his broad frame. His voice carried through the plane, steady but heavy, like every word bore the weight of a lifetime. "I've flown storms that rattled this very metal body. I've landed on strips of asphalt barely wide enough to call a runway. I've carried the sick, the lost, the wealthy, the forgotten. But today," his eyes swept across the cabin, locking briefly on each passenger before settling on the man in the front row, an older white billionaire, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, silver cufflinks catching the light, his jaw clenched in indignation. "Today I refuse to take this plane off the ground." The passengers gasped. Whispers turned into a low rumble, like thunder threatening to break. The billionaire, Richard Hale, a man known across continents for his towering hotels and ruthless empire, shot up from his seat. His voice sliced through the murmurs, sharp and commanding. "What nonsense is this? You can't refuse. Do you know who I am?" His words spat out with arrogance, a man used to control, used to obedience. David didn't flinch. His voice didn't rise, but it grew sharper, cutting through the air. "I know exactly who you are, and that's precisely why I will not fly you today." For a moment, silence returned. Thicker now, heavier, pressing down on every chest in the cabin. The billionaire's face reddened, veins swelling at his temples. "This is outrageous!" "I'll have your job. I'll make sure you never set foot in a cockpit again. You're nothing but an employee, and I—" David raised his hand, not to silence, but to hold steady his own control. "For you, I may be just an employee, but to myself I am a man, and there are some things no man should ever sell, not even for all. The money in your world." Gasps echoed. A woman in the second row whispered, "My God." Someone else muttered, "What's happening?" Children clung tighter to their parents, while some passengers leaned forward, hungry for the unfolding drama. Richard Hale stepped closer, towering, his breath shallow with rage. "You'll explain yourself right now, or I'll have the authorities drag you out of here in chains." David's eyes, dark and steady, softened for a moment, as if memory washed over him. His jaw tightened, his throat moved as though swallowing something painful. His words, when they came, were quieter, but every syllable landed like a stone on glass. "I will explain," he said. "But you may not like the truth." The billionaire scoffed, waving a hand dismissively, though his curiosity betrayed him. "Speak, then. Let's hear this truth of yours." David drew in a deep breath. He stepped further into the aisle, every passenger's eyes fixed on him. His shoulders were straight, his voice even, but his words trembled with an undercurrent of grief and fire. "Years ago," he began, "before I was a pilot, I was just a boy who believed that if he worked hard enough, dreamed big enough, maybe one day he could see the world from above the clouds. But that boy didn't just face storms in the sky. He faced storms on the ground. There were doors closed to him, jobs refused, insults thrown like stones. And yet, he kept going. He kept believing. He kept learning because someone once told him, 'No one can take away what you carry in here.'" He tapped his temple. "And in here." He pressed a hand to his chest. A hush fell. The passengers leaned in, captivated. The billionaire's smug smile faltered. David's voice grew steadier, stronger. "And when that boy grew, he earned his wings. He swore to carry everyone, no matter their name, their wealth, their power, or their skin, because the sky belongs to no one man. Up there, we're all equal." His eyes darkened, locked again on Richard Hale. But then, that boy, now a man, learned something. He learned that one man, sitting right here in this very plane, once destroyed the life of the very person who gave him the courage to dream. The entire cabin gasped. Heads snapped toward the billionaire, who shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenching harder. David's hands trembled slightly as his voice dropped, heavier, rawer. You destroyed my father, Richard Hale. You fired him from your hotel 30 years ago, not because he failed you, but because you couldn't stand the color of his skin. You humiliated him, stripped him of his dignity in front of his co-workers. And when he came home that night, I saw the strongest man I knew break. I saw him sit at the kitchen table, his hands shaking, his pride shattered, his eyes empty. He never recovered. That night killed him long before his body gave out, and I swore I would never let a man like you decide the worth of another human being again. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Some passengers covered their mouths, others shook their heads in disbelief. The billionaire's face twisted, his arrogance cracking into something uglier. Fear, shame, rage all tangled into one. You're lying, Hale stammered, his voice faltering for the first time. I don't even remember. David's eyes burned with unshed tears, though his voice never broke. That's the difference between us. You don't remember the lives you ruin, but those lives, they remember you. The cabin was dead silent now, every soul hanging on his words. The billionaire opened his mouth, then closed it, his arrogance shriveling in the weight of truth. Passengers stared at him, some with disgust, others with pity. David inhaled slowly, composing himself, though his chest still rose and fell heavily. So no, Mr. Hale, I will not fly you today. Not because I can't, not because I'm afraid, but because some things in this world still matter more than money, more than power, more than fear. His words echoed into the silence, and for the first time in years, Richard Hale had nothing to say. The plane was frozen in time. No one moved, no one breathed too loudly, as if they knew they had just witnessed something far greater than a man refusing to fly. They had seen a man stand for his dignity, his history, his truth. And in that heavy, silent cabin, every single passenger knew this flight would never be forgotten. Richard Hale's face hardened, his jaw grinding like stone under pressure. The polished billionaire, once untouchable in the world of business and power, suddenly looked smaller. But pride is a stubborn master. He puffed his chest, forcing his voice to steady, though the cracks in it betrayed him. You think you can humiliate me? On my own flight? His eyes darted around the cabin, desperate for validation. I own half the hotels some of you have stayed in. My money keeps this world spinning, and you— He jabbed a finger at David, his voice dripping venom. You are just a man in a uniform, a disposable cog in the machine that I built. Gasps echoed again. A murmur ran through the passengers, many exchanging uneasy glances. But David did not flinch, his calmness cutting through the billionaire's anger like a blade through silk. No, David said simply, his voice low but resonant. I am not disposable. None of us are. A woman in the third row spoke up, her voice trembling. Is this true? Did you really do that to his father? Richard's face reddened. He waved a hand dismissively, his arrogance scrambling for purchase. I don't recall every employee I've ever fired. People lose jobs all the time. That's business. David's hand curled into a fist at his side, but his voice stayed level, his control ironclad. It wasn't business when you walked into that kitchen 30 years ago. It wasn't business when you stood over a man who gave his heart and sweat to your hotel and told him he was unfit to be the face of your brand. It wasn't business when you humiliated him in front of his colleagues. That was cruelty. That was prejudice. And you walked away like it cost you nothing. But it cost him everything. The passengers fell quiet again, many now staring at Richard with unveiled judgment. Some shook their heads. Others looked away, ashamed to be in the same cabin with him. Richard's voice cracked as his anger gave way to desperation. You don't understand what it's like to be me, to build an empire from nothing to— David cut him off, his tone sharp, unyielding. Don't speak to me of nothing, Richard. I know what nothing is. Nothing is watching your father break because another man stole his dignity. Nothing is standing in a grocery line with food stamps while that man dines on silver platters. Nothing is being told you will never fly because people like you aren't meant to rise above the clouds. His chest heaved, his breath thick with emotion, but his eyes burned steady. And yet, I flew. A pin-drop silence followed. The words lingered, echoing in the minds of every passenger like thunder long after a storm has passed. One of the passengers, a young man in his 20s with a baseball cap and nervous hands, spoke softly. "Sir, I don't mean to pry, but why now? Why refuse today after all these years?" David's gaze softened as he looked at the young man. He hesitated, then spoke with a quiet, aching honesty. "Because today is the anniversary of the night my father came home broken." His throat tightened. I remember the way his hands shook as he tried to hold his dinner spoon. I remember my mother trying to console him. And I remember sneaking into my room, staring out the window at the night sky, promising myself that I'd rise above it all. I swore that if I ever had the chance to stand in front of the man who crushed him, I would not let silence be my prison. His voice grew stronger again, almost a roar now. "And today, fate put you on my flight, Richard Hale. And today, I will not be silent." The cabin erupted, not in applause, but in murmurs of awe, of respect, of something deeper. A woman clutched her chest, tears brimming in her eyes. A father pulled his daughter closer, whispering softly in her ear, "Listen to him. Remember this." Richard staggered back into his seat, his arrogance crumbling with every second. His lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. He was drowning in the truth he'd long buried, and for the first time, there was no army of lawyers, no army of assistants, no wall of money to protect him. Then, unexpectedly, a voice rose from the back of the plane. It was an older gentleman, his hair white, his suit modest. He stood slowly, leaning on the seat in front of him for support. His voice was calm, but it cut like a blade. "Captain Carter is right." Every head turned. The man's eyes bore into Richard's. "I worked in one of your hotels in Chicago in the 90s. I saw what you did. Not just to him, but to many others. People whose only crime was being born into skin you thought was beneath you. I watched good men lose everything, and I watched you walk away richer for it." A ripple of shock ran through the cabin. Richard's face paled, his hands gripping the armrests like lifelines. David looked at the old man, his voice softer now. "You remember him too?" The man nodded slowly, his eyes glassy with memory. "Your father was a good man, a proud man. I remember him smiling even when times were hard. I'll never forget the day he was forced out. That day we all lost something." A hush settled, heavy with truth. Some passengers wept quietly. Others stared at Richard with thinly veiled contempt. David drew in a slow, shaky breath. His voice, when he spoke again, was both weary and resolute. "So no, Mr. Hale, I won't fly you today. Not because I want revenge, not because I hate you, but because today I honor my father. And I honor every man and woman who was told they weren't enough when the truth is, they were more than enough." He turned toward the passengers, his eyes sweeping across the rows. "If that means I lose my job, so be it. If that means I never set foot in another cockpit, then that's the price I pay. But today, I will not sell my father's dignity for a seat in the sky." For the first time, applause broke out, not polite, but raw, emotional. It started with a single clap, then grew, spreading through the cabin until the entire plane was alive with it. Some passengers stood clapping through tears, others bowed their heads in respect. Richard sat frozen, unable to look anyone in the eye. His empire suddenly meant nothing. His power, his wealth, his name, all stripped bare under the simple, unshakable truth of a son standing for his father. And in that moment, the billionaire who once thought he owned the world sat powerless, while the man he tried to dismiss rose higher than he ever could. Richard Hale sat slumped in his seat, his perfectly tailored suit wrinkling under the weight of shame. For the first time in decades, his name, his money, his empire, all of it, meant nothing. Around him, the applause slowly faded into silence, but the passengers' eyes lingered, watching, judging, waiting. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until David Carter spoke again, his voice softer now, like a tide receding after a storm. "I never wanted this moment," he admitted, his eyes searching the cabin as if to find courage in the faces of strangers. "I never wanted revenge. I only wanted to fly. To take people from where they are to where they dream of being. That's what flight is. It's freedom. It's possibility. But when freedom comes at the cost of dignity, then it is no freedom at all." His words hung in the air, pulling at the hearts of everyone listening. A woman near the aisle wiped tears from her cheeks, whispering to her husband, "He's right. He's absolutely right." Then something unexpected happened. Richard Hale, who had sat stone-faced and defiant, suddenly pushed himself to his feet. His movements were stiff, awkward, like a man carrying years of weight he could no longer hide. His eyes darted nervously, avoiding David's gaze, but finally, reluctantly, they locked with his. For the first time, his voice cracked, not with anger, but with something else, vulnerability. I don't remember your father's face. I wish I did. But I remember the man you're talking about. I remember firing him. I remember thinking he didn't belong. I told myself it was business, but deep down, I knew it wasn't." The cabin went still again, passengers holding their breath. Richard swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "You're right. I ruined him, and maybe I ruined others too. I thought building an empire made me untouchable. I thought power excused everything. But looking at you now, hearing you," his voice trailed, his eyes wet, "I see the son of the man I broke, and he's standing taller than I ever could." Gasps whispered through the cabin. Richard Hale, the billionaire feared and admired across industries, was breaking down in front of strangers at 30,000 feet below. His arrogance, his pride, his shield of wealth, all crumbling like sand. David's jaw tightened. He didn't move, didn't gloat, didn't soften. He simply stood silent, letting the weight of truth do what years of silence never could. Finally, Richard lowered his gaze. "I can't undo what I did, but I am sorry. God help me, I'm sorry." The words were clumsy, imperfect, but real. Passengers shifted, some nodding, others watching with cautious hope. A woman whispered, "Maybe this is the first time he's ever said those words." David's eyes softened, though his body remained rigid. He exhaled slowly, then said, "My father won't hear your apology. It's too late for him, but maybe it isn't too late for you." Richard blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" David stepped closer, his voice steady, unwavering. "You have money. You have influence. You built towers and chains of hotels that stretch across the world. But what good is it if it leaves ruins in its shadow? Use what you have to build people, not destroy them. Honor the memory of the people you've broken by lifting up the people who still stand. If you want to make amends, don't tell me. Show the world. Do better." The billionaire's lips quivered. He said nothing, but his head bowed, and for the first time in decades, Richard Hale looked less like an empire and more like a man. The passengers erupted into applause again, but this time it wasn't for David alone. It was for truth, for dignity, for the chance of change. Some clapped for the pilot, others for the idea that even the powerful could be humbled, and a few for the hope that maybe the world could be better if people chose differently. David turned back toward the cockpit, but before stepping inside, he faced the passengers one last time. His voice was calm now, carrying the weight of closure. Remember this moment, not because a pilot refused to fly a billionaire, but because dignity is worth more than wealth. Respect is worth more than power, and courage is worth more than fear. You don't need wings to rise. You just need the strength to stand when silence feels safer. The cabin was silent again, every word sinking deep. People knew this wasn't just about a flight. It was about life, about choices, about the unseen battles each person carries. Then, with a slow nod, David disappeared into the cockpit. The passengers sat in stunned silence, the weight of what they'd witnessed settling into their hearts. The flight might still happen, or maybe it wouldn't, but no one on board would ever forget the day a black pilot stood taller than a billionaire. And the lesson lingered. In daily life, you don't need grand stages to prove your worth. Sometimes it's as simple as standing up when someone at work belittles you, or refusing to laugh at a cruel joke, or speaking up when you see someone treated unfairly. Dignity isn't won in the skies. It's earned in the everyday choices we make on the ground. And as you go back to your own daily battles, remember this. Wealth may buy silence, but courage will always speak louder. Because at the end of it all, one truth remains. No empire stands taller than a man who refuses to bow. If you found this story moving, make sure to subscribe to our channel, Black Saga, for more powerful stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the strength within us all.